So good day, everyone. It's with really great pleasure that we welcome you both in person and online to the 2025 Global Centre on Biodiversity for Climate Research Symposium. And we'd like to thank you all for joining us today here at the Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew, and for what we hope will be an engaging and thought-provoking series of talks and panel discussions. My name is Dr. Elizabeth Warham, and I lead the team here at the Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew, supporting the delivery of the GCBC programme. And before I welcome our chair to the podium to begin this first session, I'd like to provide a couple of notices for both those in person and those online attending today. For those in person, obviously there's the usual health and safety aspects. In the event of an emergency, an alarm will sound. Please remain calm and leave your belongings behind you and follow the directions of the Kew staff to the nearest exit, and we'll assemble outside by on the grass just past the pond outside the front of the Jodrell laboratory. And there are no fire drills scheduled today, so any alarm will be treated as genuine. And it's my pleasure to, in terms of those joining online, thank you for being with us virtually from around the world, wherever you are, and watching the symposium, both on the GCBC online platform, but also on the very special YouTube channel, which has been set up for today. It's now my pleasure to welcome to the podium our chair for this first session, Professor Monique Simmons, the Deputy Director of Science for here at the Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, and real big welcome to those online and here in the Jodrell Lecture Theatre. It's been an interesting journey over the last few years, setting up the centre, etc. And I think we've been on a learning curve. One of the features that really distinguishes the GCBC from many others is the fact of the innovation aspect associated with research, and this kind of interacting between climate change, biodiversity, and livelihoods, real challenges that are so important for this age. And it's been great to see those, applications being made, and then the development of those to results, etc. And hopefully, with the outputs of the projects, which many of you are involved in, they will be in a position to feed into policies, which is a key aim of this particular programme. So to start off with, we're going to have a series of presentations, really representing the institutes that have been involved, from Kew to DEFRA and then DAI. And so I'd like to start off with Alex Antonelli. Professor Alex Antonelli, he is the Director of Science here at the Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew. And he has a distinguished career in different aspects of biodiversity, not just biodiversity of plants and fungi, but also of animals, and has a distinguished academic record with many publications, with a real challenge that he wants to address, which is the saving of biodiversity, but also the use and the links it has to livelihoods. A very fitting kind of overview for GCBC. He is currently in Gothenburg in Sweden, where he holds a professorship in systematics and biodiversity. And I'm hoping you are now online. As you are, Alex, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Monique. And hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. depending on where you are. It's really a great pleasure that we at the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew are hosting the 3rd Annual Global Center on Biodiversity for Climate Symposium this year. And we're delighted to welcome so many of you that have joined us today, both in person and online from around the world. So the Global Center on Biodiversity for Climate, or GCBC, really aims to support developing countries to shape decision-making and develop policies that better value, protect, restore, and sustainably manage biodiversity in ways that tackle climate change and poverty. So we at Kew believe that there could not be a more timely or societally relevant nexus to focus on through the combination of science, nature, and practical knowledge. And that's to support countries to achieve a nature-positive future by not only halting, but also reversing biodiversity loss whilst contributing to poverty alleviation. So on behalf of Kew, Professor Monique Simmons, who we've just listened to, has worked very closely with DEFRA for 3.5 years or so, developing the science vision for the GCBC. And we've helped to ensure that as the program became established, it remains true to the original concept, which is this very nexus that brings together nature, climate, and people. So in the last couple of years, the GCBC team established at Kew as the strategic science lead has worked closely with DEFRA, developing the research strategy, which was launched in February last year. And the strategy sets out and shapes the science direction of the program with 10 deliverable principles and 6 strategic science priorities. The Kew GCBC team has also helped to ensure the importance of science that is funded through the GCBC Research Grant competitions. By working in close partnership with DAI Global, the fund management lead, in the design and implementation of a 2-stage application process for the award of grants in the annual grant competitions. And this has included guidance to applicants on the 10 delivery principles and delivering research for impact through the early market engagement webinars. I hope many of you had the chance to participate in those. This strong partnership has had to deliver at speed. As Monique was mentioning, it's been a learning curve for many of us, and many different activities in parallel, including but not limited to program design, delivery of grant competitions, now into the 3rd grant competition within 2 years, and also stakeholder engagement. And that's through communications, learning events, regional networks, as well as continuous monitoring, evaluation, and learning to really improve and refine the program as it becomes established. The themes of the most recent grant competition were launched at the Kew GCBC team in Riyadh at COP16 in Saudi Arabia last December, through 2 events hosted in partnership with the Consultative Group on International Agricultural Research, CGR, and their partners as well. And the Kew team has established the Strategic Science Network through partnerships with the Center for Agriculture and Biosciences International Archives, or CABI, CIFAS, which is the Center for Environment, Fisheries, and Agricultural Science, CEH, the Institute of Development Studies, IDS, the Joint Nature Conservation Committee, the Natural History Museum, the Overseas Development Institute, Rothamsted Research, the World Researchers Institute, University of Greenwich, and I hope I haven't forgot anyone, but many of you are represented here today and who have also provided their long-term expertise to help with the assessment of applications to the grant competitions. And this approach across many disciplines, as you've noticed, and with non-academic stakeholders as well, has been guided by the principle that scientific rigor has to meet societal relevance. And I hope you all agree with me that it has been the case. And the collaboration is helping also to strengthen the links, not just between the North and the South, but also within partners in the Global South. So I'm absolutely delighted to see that there are now over 21 countries who are eligible to the Official Development Assistance, or ODA, that have been involved in 42 GCBC funded projects with 126 partners to date. I think it's absolutely amazing to see this outcome. And the urgency of the challenge that the GCBC addresses cannot be underestimated. we see the pressure building and the urgency of concerted action as we reach the midpoint of what's been declared by the United Nations as the critical decade for changing the trajectory of biodiversity loss. And beyond the impacts of knowledge gaps and inaccuracies on efforts to answer fundamental scientific questions, there are, of course, very serious implications for biodiversity conservation, given that several targets of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, such as those related to protecting and restoring nature, have to rely on robust biodiversity data, which is really a cornerstone of what we do at GCBC. And this is the key motivation for Keo's triennial State of the World's Plants and Fungi, which some of you may have come across in the past. And that's a publication and symposium, also in partnership with Monique and my colleagues at Keo, which provide assessments of the current state of knowledge on the diversity of plants and fungi, the global threats they face, and the policies to safeguard them. The most recent edition we published tells us that 3 in 4, so about 75% of all plant species yet to be described are likely to be at risk of extinction. And there's similar extinction risks for different species of fauna, and we know very little about the extinction risk of fungi. So just as our early ancestors needed to know what lived where for their own survival, so flora, fauna, and fungi need to know they need us to know where they live and survive, so that can enable us to safeguard their continued existence for generations to come. And I don't have to tell you in this audience that the challenges we face are extremely complex and multifaceted. But I do want to highlight that the proposed interventions that we can come up with as scientists can often be contested or understood differently by different groups. And for this reason, we need to invest time and resources to develop and nurture research partnerships that are equitable, collaborative, and pluralistic, bringing together members of relevant communities and of place, knowledge, and practice. It is about co-producing knowledge among all collaborators in ways that enable stakeholders to co-shape the research and also to value the knowledge of indigenous peoples and local communities, so we can develop socially robust and effective solutions. And innovative policies and practices, which is really the topic of this opening session, they need to consider the interconnectedness of climate, biodiversity, and livelihoods, so the nexus of GCBC, but also the policy in other areas such as food, health, energy, water, land use, and oceans. And achieving much closer collaboration and coordination with these wider areas is also a major challenge, I think, for policymakers, which not only requires the right evidence, guidance, and toolkits to help with informed decision, but also taking a systems approach. And the UK government defines innovation as the creation and application of new knowledge to improve the world. And in research, innovation is the process of developing and testing new ideas, methods, or technologies, or improving existing ones in ways that advance knowledge, solve problems, or create value for specific groups. So GCBC funded projects are combining these two things, a systems approach and innovation, including emerging technologies, business models, policy practices, approaches, and partnerships. And I believe it's fair to say that although progress towards achieving global and regional goals for climate and nature may feel a bit slow sometimes, it is being made. So just last week, for instance, the COP16 biodiversity negotiations officially concluded in the second resumed session in Rome, with countries agreeing on a strategy to increase finance for biodiversity to $200 billion every year by 2030. And countries also adopted a monitoring framework to track countries' progress toward the Global Biodiversity Framework targets, including the goals to protect 30% of the world's land and water and restore 30% of degraded ecosystems by 2030. COP30 later this year in my own home country, Brazil, will represent a symbolic milestone, marking 10 years since the Paris Agreement and 5 years to 2030. So the Brazilian government are very keen to focus on the intrinsic connection between nature and climate and to scale up action on the bioeconomy. And South Africa is now following that lead. And within this context of major threats to humanity, to ourselves, our children and grandchildren, and the natural world on the one hand, and then the sense of opportunity and potential, which I really believe exists for positive impact on the other hand, the GBC is very well placed to make a tangible and distinctive contribution. I look forward to hearing from Gideon Henderson, Chief Scientific Advisor at DEFRA, about the achievements from the GCBC funded projects to date, and also learning from Gate about the EA's related work. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Alex, for your contribution and really showing, I think, the relevance of GCBC. So thank you. And so now we move on, and I'd like to welcome to the podium Professor Gideon Henderson. Gideon is the Chief Scientific Advisor at the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, known as DEFRA. That was back in October 2019, I believe, around that date. And it's this role, he is responsible for overseeing the quality of evidence that the department relies on for policy decisions. Now, Gideon has played a really important role in championing GCBC, and we really are appreciative of your stewardship and overall input into where we are today. I think without you, I don't think we would have got so far. So thank you. Gideon, over to you.
Thanks. Thanks very much, Monique. And I think there's a slight error on here, just to repeat that I am the Chief Scientific Advisor. I'm not trying to represent Monique in the title that's up on the screen at the moment. So thank you all for joining today. I appreciate that those in the room have sometimes travelled quite far and spent a long time getting here, and those online might be in time zones scattered around the 20 hours of the day, and very much appreciate you taking the time to join us and to share some of the learnings and findings that you have got through your engagement with the GCBC programme and beyond. And thank you also to the organisers and all of those who make the programme operate. Now, I wanted to start off by saying a little bit about the overall remit of the Global Centre on Biodiversity for Climate as a programme, and a little bit about the history of that programme, to frame the discussions that are going to take place in the next day. I'll start off by describing the early history. It was initiated as a programme in 2022, and it is funded by ODA funded, so Official Development Assistance Funding. It's funded specifically as part of the International Climate Finance Commitment of the UK government. And that's a commitment of 11.6 billion over the 5 years, that 11.6 billion pounds over the 5 years that end in 2025-26. And GCBC forms a part of that, and therefore is fundamentally a climate programme, but it's specific in that area by trying very explicitly to harness the benefits that we get from biodiversity to look after climate and the world's poorest as they tackle and address climate change for the future. That's the nature of the funding. It's an R&D programme. That's important, as Monique has said at the beginning, to stress here, research and development programme. And as such, it seeks to deliver locally relevant research to inform actions that work best in country in the particular place, and therefore to develop new approaches that can be used to tackle both mitigation of climate and particularly adaptation, and enabling people in a very local sense to be better adapted for the changing climate that we know is coming. It's very important. Perhaps I would say this. I'm a scientist by background and a researcher by instinct, so I would say this, wouldn't I? But I think that it's true that research and development is a very powerful approach to realise objectives of development and to help the world's poor and to further livelihoods. It can't be done alone. It needs to be done coupled to action, and one of the goals of GCBC is very much to use the research that comes out of this programme to work out what policy interventions and what actions might be taken to improve livelihoods and improve climate resilience. But it's a very powerful tool to make lasting change in the way that we tackle the challenges of the future. It's also true to say that very often research and development projects, such as those that you represent in this programme, play an important role in capacity building and building scientific and other strengths in countries that give a resilience of their own, quite apart from the resilience that they foster towards climate change. DEFRA, the department that I represent and others in this room represent, is one of 5 UK government departments that delivers R&D ODA spending, along with our Foreign Department, FCDO, our Health Department, DHSC, our Energy and Climate Department, DESNES, and our Science Department, DCIT. And these 5 departments together coordinate our activity on R&D within our ODA portfolio. It's also really important to recognise, and I think you see this from those in the room, and certainly from the conversations that I had over the rather nice muffin and coffee beforehand, that this is explicitly an international programme which is forging links between different players in the global north and in the global south, with many, if not all of the projects either led from the south or involving strong north-south connectivity, and with representation very strong from the global south on our expert steering committee that guides some of our thinking here. Now, the programme, as it initiated in 2022, had to ramp up projects very quickly, and in phase 1 of GCBC, projects that are ready to go were funded in that first year. 11 projects in phase 1 have now completed, and we've done some evaluation of those projects, so we know that during their operation, 128 research partnerships were forged through those projects. Partnerships with public bodies, with private bodies, and with the third sector. And those were in the global south and spread across multiple countries, but often with strong linkages to the north as well. I'm pleased to see that, to say that at least 2 of those initial projects have now secured additional funding and continue outside GCBC to further the work they started inside the programme. The first dedicated call within GCBC led to new projects that started last year in 2024, 13 projects in all from that first competition, delivering £9 million of funding to 16 countries. And 2024 was a busy year altogether, because not only did we launch Competition 1 projects, but it was also the launch of Competition 2, where the call was made. And subsequent to that, we now have 18 new Competition 2 projects, spending a 13.4 million in 16 countries with a real global reach that spreads across Latin America, the Caribbean, Africa, and Southeast Asia. I'm delighted that today, both in person and online, we're joined by people from phase 1, from Competition 1 and Competition 2 projects. And what we really hope to get from this meeting and this gathering is that a sharing of knowledge and a sharing of best practice, so that you can share information about what has worked in setting up your projects, what are you learning from the research and development that you are doing, how can you share that and how can you learn from others, and how can we extract from that R&D some of the actions that we should take to further improve climate resilience into the future. Today's event builds on previous workshops and previous activities. Both Monique and Alex have mentioned some of those. I'll just mention 2 in particular. One was the GCBC event held in Kenya last September, which was co-organised by GCBC with UKRI partnerships, particularly through their Equitable Nature-Based Climate Resilience in Sub-Saharan Africa project. A mouthful to say, but as you get the sense of that title, very much to do with the goals of GCBC about using nature to enhance climate resilience. That was also done in partnership with the Resourcing Environmental Degradation in Africa project, and brought together 28 different projects to lead networking, forge links, and share best practice. We also know that the GCBC projects were well represented at the Convention for Biodiversity COP16 meeting, not to be confused with the other COP16 meeting that Alex mentioned earlier that made announcements about Competition 3, but that one in Colombia involved a number of side events organised by projects represented here and from GCBC. And I'll just mention one of those, because the title really gives the essence of some of the goals of GCBC. And that was an event organised by the project to harness Andean crop diversity to weather climate change. And as you can tell from that title, very explicitly about taking the knowledge we get from diversity, from biodiversity, so that we can better understand climate change and how to be resilient to it. A project run by the International Potato Centre in collaboration with AgroSavia. That project focused on conservation and it drew in at the COP meeting in Cali seed guardians from many countries in the region, including Colombia, Ecuador, Bolivia, and Peru. I partly wanted to mention that project by name because it's related so closely to one of the themes in competition 3 of GCBC. And those two themes are, firstly, to use biodiversity to improve the climate resilience of agriculture, food, and the bioeconomy value chain. So you can see why that Andean project is so similar in scope. And the second goal of competition 3 is to look at biodiversity hotspots in SIDS, in small island developing states. And that competition remains open. We're expecting expression of interest to come in a couple of weeks. Now, before I close my comments and run out of time and pass over to Kate, I do think I must say something about the developments in aid funding internationally that have happened in recent weeks, and particularly with relevance to GCBC, the announcement last week by our Prime Minister to reduce UK ODA funding. There is now uncertainty, frankly, about all of UK ODA spending. We are working, those from DEFRA in the room, and there's several of us here, are working very closely and very actively across government to increase the level of certainty we have about what will happen to some of the ODA projects, including the GCBC project. So there's a limited amount that I can say at this stage. But one thing I can say is at present we do not expect any changes to 2025-26 spending. And we are working very hard to work out and be able to communicate what will happen to ODA funding beyond 2025-26. And we'll make sure you know as soon as we're able to share information. I can reassure, though, by saying that GCBC, this programme, remains DEFRA's absolute flagship R&D programme, and it's a really important part of our delivery of ICF activity and our ODA goals. So we are very strongly behind GCBC in DEFRA, and we'll be working hard to maintain its success and enable it to continue to deliver. That's important background to know here, but for now, in this meeting, I think we should be celebrating the successes of GCBC, planning for the coming year and planning for beyond, so that we can learn from the great work that's being done in the many projects that you represent here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gideon, especially for the last part, indicating that you're hoping definitely for next year that funding will continue. I think it really is important for this particular project. Now, as I said, 3 institutes kind of come together for this, and last but definitely not least, DAI, who are the management leads for GCBC. And Kate is an experienced leader in global development, working at the nexus between climate transition, governance, and public health. She has a particular interest in the interdependencies between human and natural ecosystems. And Kate and her team at DAI have delivered the GCBC's research grant programme since 2023. So very important in collating all the information that goes out, marking, and therefore managing the projects as they go forward. Kate, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and very good morning to you all, and thank you to DEFRA and to Kew Gardens for this opportunity to celebrate GCBC. And I'd also like to extend a very warm welcome to the grantees who've travelled far and wide to be here today, and congratulate them and the GCBC team for their achievements. And a quick shout out to the DAI team who run things behind the scenes: Andy, Duncan, Lucille, Jess, Anna, Tony, Shazad, and Katz. Thanks to you. So I'm Kate Wilson-Hargreaves, Director for Climate and Environment at DAI. We're a global international development consultancy that for GCBC manages the grant competitions, the flows of funds, and the programme management. And we work very closely with the technical leadership from Kew Gardens to ensure that high quality, compelling evidence emerges from the grant projects. Now, I'm a social scientist, not a real scientist, so I'm particularly honoured today to be among so many biodiversity experts at this symposium. My background is in governance and systems change at the interface between climate, energy, health and finance. And these are nexus issues in sustainable development, by which I mean they're interconnected, they're complex, they're multi-layered, just like systems found in nature. And that leads me to think about biodiversity projects and nature in a slightly different light. There are so many lessons coming out of GCBC that can offer advice to mainstream international development on addressing social issues, social inclusion, and giving agency and decision-making power to local people and institutions. How do I move this along? Hard, okay. There we go, great. So I think I first fully appreciated why biodiversity is so important for addressing climate and tackling poverty when I visited Cockle Bay on the sea estuary in Freetown, Sierra Leone, to observe mangrove restoration work. This is one of the poorest countries in the world, highly vulnerable to climate shocks and with very few resources to fund climate adaptation. And this scene shows a lone mangrove tree on a peninsula that used to be covered in mangrove forest. And it's the result of uncontrolled urbanization as rural people move into the city to try to find income and end up building houses on the coast's edge and displacing mangroves. The man here is a mangrove planter, part of a geotagging project within the Freetown the Tree Town initiative, which supports livelihoods and also provides essential protective services to the city, from cooling the streets to shoring up the coastline and to providing new income from carbon credits. So how does this relate to GCBC? This programme uniquely helps projects to scale through evidence from applied research that shows the economic value of ecosystem services, both in terms of livelihoods for local communities and individuals, and through financial returns to investors. And this diagram depicts the mutual dependencies between climate change, human development, and biodiversity, which is the key challenge at the heart of GCBC, how to ensure those three areas are in balance. And I'll be briefly introducing 5 of the grantees that tackle this challenge. ESPOL's mangrove restoration in Ecuador, multifunctional forests from Nature Kenya and ICRAF in Ethiopia, indigenous knowledge protection in Colombia with CIAS, and safeguarding global seaweed stocks under SAMS. But what I want to highlight today is not just what these projects do to improve biodiversity, but also the ways in which the projects operate, because it's that which ensures the results are sustainable for the long term. The success of these projects is in large part because they are delivered through strongly localised and inclusive approaches, focused on Indigenous people and local communities and how they apply those research findings. And in a moment of crisis and international development where funding from institutional funders is being cut, GCBC provides some really useful pointers on how to blend expertise and funding. By filling critical research gaps and providing evidence of additionality, GCBC projects have been able to operationalise policy-relevant research and leverage additional funds, as has been mentioned. A couple of the projects have already leveraged significant funding to support further applied research into biodiversity. So the first project I want to highlight is for multifunctional agroforestry from the International Centre for Research in Agroforestry, ICRAF, in Ethiopia. It's helping the local community to diversify seeds and improve farming practices. And this, in turn, improves local ecosystems as well as increasing the livelihoods of local people. And I love this particular example because in the ICRAF project, it highlights how improved understanding of biodiversity can have immediate benefits on human livelihoods. In this case, for this young woman, Salamawit, photographed here, who was unable to finish her schooling because her parents' income from their smallholder farm was insufficient to pay the school fees. But when she engaged with ICRAF's project, she learned smart agricultural techniques and switched to a different variety of avocado crop that matures in half the time. So this gave her family enough money for her to return to school. My second example is Nature Kenya and the Karangani Nature Reserve. And I picked it because it demonstrates the power of localization, which has also been mentioned several times already today. There's a really important place in biodiversity research, an essential place for globally renowned institutions like the brilliant Royal Botanical Gardens at Kew and research institutions like SAMS. But it's really crucial for long-term sustainability that southern organisations take the lead, especially for taking forward the results into local policy making. Nature Kenya is helping establish payment for ecosystem services in Karangani, providing incentives to landowners to develop ecology services in land management and bringing to life the constitutional right to a clean and healthy environment. It works in partnership with local universities and government institutions like the Kenya Forest Research Institute and with local communities to establish several tree nurseries and community forest associations. And the programme has also delivered a forest landscape restoration plan to bring in investors to Karangani. Another great example of localisation of knowledge is SIAS's work with the Gran Tescual Indigenous Reservation in Colombia. The illustrated botanical guide shown here classifies plants according to different users and integrates traditional ecological knowledge into biodiversity conservation advice and modern science on climate action. And it's therefore both a tool for knowledge and education, but it also helps the local communities and Indigenous people to benefit financially from sustainable use of natural assets. The final two projects I'm going to talk about deal with coastal biodiversity, and I'm particularly excited about these because of the synergy with a large FCDO-funded programme on ocean governance and blue economy that DAI has just started working on in partnership with the governments of Mozambique, Vietnam, Philippines and Indonesia. The first project here, SAMS, Global Seaweed Superstar Programme, this protects seaweed habitats. We know that those habitats are facing 70% habitat loss over the next 70 years. Now, Indigenous people and local communities have been harvesting seaweed for 40 years, but it's now vulnerable to heat. And we know that over 31 degrees temperature, the seaweed is prone to disease. Superstar helps seaweed farmers to identify and cultivate more resilient strains of seaweed and is also helping them to broaden the market for seaweed sale, expanding the supply chain into biofuels and plastic substitutes, as well as increasing yield. One of my favourites, mangrove systems, we all know, are a sort of super crop, brilliant sources of food and livelihoods, but we also know that over-extraction has threatened species and damaged the ecosystem. New conservation techniques are being practiced by ESPOL in Ecuador by working with universities and fishermen to develop protocols for hatcheries and replenish stocks of crabs, oysters, and black cockles. And by rejuvenating the mangrove ecosystems, this work enhances carbon sequestration and supports coastal protection. And ESPOL is also helping sea farmers to access international markets for black cockles, as you see here in the middle of the photo, for which they can secure $20 per 100 cockles from selling to communities down the coast in Peru. And they can also attract a premium price for cockles harvested using fair trade criteria. In summary, valuing diversity in all its forms generates both wealth for humans and balance for the planet. There's so much we can learn from nature. Collaborative approaches that we see from GCBC projects draw in diverse peoples and learn from complex natural ecosystems and result in better outcomes for both people and planet. And I'd like to conclude with a quote from one of my favourite books, James Bridle's book on ways of being, on the importance of embracing intelligence of all beings and systems, humans, natural and machine, to create sustainable development on Earth. The enemy is not technology itself, but rather inequality and the centralisation of power and knowledge. And the answers to these threats are education, diversity, and justice. You don't need artificial intelligence to work that out. You need actual intelligence. But more importantly, you need all the actual intelligences, every person, animal, plant, and bug, every critter, every stone, and every natural and unnatural system. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much to our three speakers, Alex, Gideon and Kate, for really, I think, giving an overview of what's the drivers, etc., for GCBC. And now we are going to move forward to the next main session, our first main session of the conference. But before we do that, we are ahead of ourselves. Very unusual at this stage in the conference, actually. And so we're going to just pause for a few minutes to enable you to stand up, stretch, etc. But please don't go anywhere. Just